Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about the dreaded flat mites or false mites. These things have been the bane of my existence since late last year all the way through until spring this year, and in fact, I am still dealing with some flat mites in my collection right now. It has been a bit of a journey with these, and I've been wanting to make this video for like 10 months, but I really wanted to feel like I got a handle on them before I spoke about them, so I can give you the solutions that I have used to get rid of them properly. And I have had success. I was able to get rid of flat mites within my collection, thank goodness, and I wanted to share a bit more about them with you today and how I got this done. So if you're battling flat mites, or if you don't know you're battling flat mites, because that is a big thing. I didn't know I was battling flat mites, even though I was. This is a good video just to help you get to know them better and to help you treat them if you are suffering with them in like right now or down the line. Before we get into it though, I want to say if you're new here and you don't know me already, hi, my name is Emma and I make houseplanty content all over the internet. So if you want to follow along with my houseplanty journey and maybe learn something along the way, stick around, watch some more of my videos, and subscribe to my channel. If you're not new here, I really appreciate you returning. I sincerely hope that none of y'all are battling with flat mites, but I think it is probably likely if you're here watching this video that you are. So hopefully I can help you get rid of them today. So first off, a little bit of general information about flat mites. So flat mites or false mites, they go by either name, are microscopic,
tiny, very, very tiny
mites, aka arachnids, that can affect houseplants, and most notably Hoyas. They are huge fans of Hoyas, but they can affect many different plants in your collection. I have had some on anthuriums before, I've had some on Hoyas, I've had some on all kinds of things. They were in my cabinet, which sucked, but they can feed on all types of plants, but they are most notably known for attacking Hoyas specifically. And because they are so tiny, microscopic even, they are really easy to miss until there starts to be a big problem, until your plants are showing signs of like not significant damage, but like a decent damage before you notice them. Because they're so small, you can technically see them with your naked eye, but you're probably not going to see them at first glance. It's not going to happen. You're going to see the damage before you see the flat mites in most cases. But basically they cause damage to your houseplants and can even cause plants, specifically Hoyas, to stop growing entirely. So if you've got some Hoyas in your collection that you've not seen grow for a little while, it might be worth giving them a closer look to see if there's flat mites, and see if you can sort that out and get your Hoyas growing again. So let's talk about what these little flat mites look like. So they are very small and very difficult to see with your naked eye. Until you are able to recognize them, you probably will not see them with your naked eye. I have since learned how to recognize them, but they look like literal pinprick red dots that move around on your plant, and they're so difficult to see. But you can do it if you've got decent eyes. I think I've got decent eyes, so you can see them with your naked eyes, but it is very difficult. And I would suggest either using your phone camera, like one of those like jeweler's loops, or even a USB microscope to see them. Back last year when I found them on my Hoya polyneura, I was actually able to see them with my naked eye because I had experience looking for them for a while at that point, and my polyneura was infested with them. They were all over, and that thing just was not growing at all. And so I pulled out my phone, and with my macro camera on that, you can get in and zoom in on them and be able to see them with that. But I found the best way to definitely identify them was with my USB microscope. I highly suggest investing in one of those if you can. I found it really useful for checking my Hoyas and my other plants for the flat mites because they're much easier to see with the microscope than with your bare eye or even your phone camera. So if you can get one, they're really cheap off of Amazon. I'm pretty sure mine was like 20 quid, so not much. And I have used it several times to look for pests in general, and it has really helped, especially with flat mites. They're called flat mites because of their flat, oval-shaped bodies, and they're called false mites because they do look similar to spider mites, but they are much smaller than spider mites. I was trying to find a comparison picture of the two, but they are much smaller than the average spider mite, but they look similar in form. They are both mites, they are both part of the arachnid family, and so they are related, but they're not the same thing, and they do cause slightly different damage. Also, identifying them from their eggs is a really good way to see them. You might not see any actual flat mites crawling around on your plants, but you might see their little orange eggs laid in sort of cracks and crevices within your plant. And that is also a very good sign that they are there, because you'll see little eggs in, especially in Hoyas, you know how they kind of get that woody texture on their stems and it's like kind of cracked? They like to lay their eggs in there because it's a little bit more protected on the plant, and then they will eventually hatch and grow into flat mites. But you will most likely be identifying flat mites through the damage. That is probably what you're going to see the most. So these flat mites are basically biting into your plant and inserting a little toxin in there, which causes your plants to blister. And when they've gone around this area, it'll end up looking a bit calloused or scabby or tarnished. And this damage tends to be at the base of the leaf, on the underside of the leaf, around the petioles and stems, and especially around Hoya new growth. They like that sort of, I mean, I guess it's easier to eat because it's fresher, and so it's easier to get in there and do their damage on the new growth. Growth can also come out warped and misshapen, and eventually prevent them from growing new growth entirely because of that damage. So it can look kind of like your node of your Hoya has tried to put out several different growth points, but all of them have gotten stuck, so they kind of look a little bit blobbly. But the damage on the leaves, like I said, is going to be more of a calloused, scabby looking damage. The life cycle of flat mites is also quite long, and so that causes them to be harder to deal with because they have such a long life cycle. So once an egg is laid, it'll hatch anywhere between 8 and 16 days later. And from that hatching, it takes an average of 10 days for the flat mite to become an adult. But once they are an adult, they can live for quite a long time. Like even 5 or 6 weeks they will live as an adult. And during that whole time, all the females are going to be laying more and more eggs, and those will be following that life cycle and hatching. So you will have several generations of flat mites on your plant at the same time because adults can live so long. And unfortunately that makes treatment more difficult because you're gonna have to repeat it typically in order to get rid of them entirely. And treatment is where people get into trouble with flat mites. Pesticides do not work. You can't use something like Provanto to get rid of flat mites. I don't even suggest you use Provanto to get rid of other pests because it is really bad for us, our plants, the microbiome, the environment, all these things. So you can't use pesticides on them because they're arachnids, they're mites. They don't like have problems with the pesticides as something like thrips would. I've also seen people like kind of dunking, like soaking their plants, like fully submerging them in warm water to get rid of flat mites. And I've watched several YouTubers literally melt their Hoyas like this. Apparently it does work if you do it right, but the amount of trial and error I've seen people go through for it, was just not worth it. That was not something that I wanted to even think about doing to my plants, because it was just, it seemed like such a faff, and I didn't want to lose my plants in that process. So I wouldn't really recommend the dunking in hot water method, though some people say it does work. I wouldn't even go there personally. And then the other thing that I was seeing online was sulfur treatment. And lots of people were recommending sulfur treatment, but I didn't really want to spray sulfur throughout my home because it was gonna be smelly. Sulfur does not smell pleasant, and it was gonna look ugly and just generally not be a good time. But this is the treatment that I bit the bullet on and just went for it because it was the thing that I heard people having the best success with. People were sharing their stories about how it did work and got rid of the flat mites. And even though it was going to take time and could potentially be a bit gross, it was going to be worth it. So that was the method that I chose to pursue to get rid of my flat mites. And I treated my entire plant collection with the sulfur as well, not just the Hoyas. I knew that I had flat mites in my cabinet on some anthuriums even, and so I just wanted to treat everything in there just to be safe. And so I figured if I'm treating all of them, and if I know I have Hoyas throughout my home that are touching other plants, I may as well just treat everything in hopes that I can get rid of them. So I treated every single plant, except for the cacti and succulents, in my collection with the sulfur treatment. And I mean, it worked. It was a lot of work, but it was worth it, and I was able to get rid of my flat mites. So let me go through that whole sulfur treatment process with y'all. So you do need some supplies for this treatment. First off, you're gonna need the sulfur, and you can get other sulfurs, but this is the sulfur that I heard the best things about. This is Bonnide's sulfur plant fungicide, and it controls a whole bunch of things like rust, leaf spots, powdery mildew, as well as pests. And that is what I bought it for, the use of it with pests. And I found that it worked really well, and surprisingly it is not, like, it smells a tiny bit, but it doesn't smell as sulfurous as it probably could. There's definitely much, oh, it's also got some stickiness on the cap right now, but it doesn't smell that bad. Like, I wouldn't even say that it smells particularly sulfurous. Like, it doesn't have that like sort of rotten egg smell that you would like think of as sulfury. So I was really pleased about that. I was scared when I was buying sulfur that it was going to just like stink up my entire house, but luckily this stuff didn't. You're also going to need a spray bottle, and I specifically recommend this sort of hand pump pressure sprayer kind of bottle, because the first time I did my like treatment on a couple rounds of plants, I was using a normal like hand trigger spray bottle, and that was rough. I needed to use my hand like this a lot, as well as the sulfur clogged up the tube of that spray bottle and made it stop working, so it was not ideal. But I wanted something that I could still get a fine mist with, and this one has an adjustable nozzle. Oh, okay, it's still got some moisture in there that I've just dripped over myself now. But it's got an adjustable nozzle here where you can adjust the fineness of the spray, and I found that was really useful because you're putting a powder into water and it doesn't fully dissolve. Like, you could adjust this nozzle to make sure that the powder would still get through and it wouldn't clog up this thing, and I didn't have to manually pump it. I could just press the trigger down and spray it, and so it worked really well. It made the whole treatment process a whole lot easier. I also highly recommend gloves and a mask for when you are doing this sulfur treatment. This stuff isn't particularly kind to your skin or your lungs, and so it is best practice to use gloves and a mask while you are spraying your plants. I really didn't want to do this as a lazy plant parent. I did not want to, but my patrons were really concerned about me and really begged me to use a glove and mask when doing my treatments, and I did it for them, and I'm really glad I did because I wasn't harmed by it and I didn't have the harsh effects of sulfur on my body, which is really useful. I didn't want this one to damage me at all, so wear gloves and a mask, and if you possibly can, do this outside in a well-ventilated area. Personally, I don't have outdoor space. I don't have a place where I could bring my plants outside and spray them all in any sort of realistic capacity. If I wanted to do that, I would have to take a billion trips up and down 2 flights of stairs and go into the public parking lot outside our flat. And so that's just not an ideal solution for me. But if you have a balcony or a porch or something that you can work on, that would be great. But you want to make sure that it is shaded, it is covered, because while these plants are drying, you need to protect them from sunlight as well. I also forgot to mention this in the initial film, but it is very important when you've got the sulfur on your plant and it is still wet to keep them out of any sort of sunlight or grow lights, because I have heard that it can burn the leaves. I'm not quite sure if it's just the sulfur makes the water refract in a weird way and burn your plants or what, but make sure to keep them in a shaded area, covered, or in your dark bathroom with the lights off. I would only put the plants back into their places on my shelves hours and hours later because I was waiting for them to dry, but only when it was the evening time and I knew that they weren't going to be getting any light for the foreseeable, in case they still had a bit more water on them that could cause them to burn. So be really careful with that. Don't put your sulfured plants in the light when they are still wet. Once they're dry and you just have the sulfur spots on them, it's fine, but if there's any sort of moisture on the leaves, it can cause damage, so be very careful of that. You can just do it in your bathtub. I did all of my plants in my bath and that worked fine for me. I just made sure that when I was doing it, I put the fan on to ventilate, wore my mask and gloves to protect myself, and that worked fine. It did just mean my plants were occupying space in my bath for many hours at a time, which was fine. It's just slightly less ideal. So if you can do it outside, highly recommend. I personally would suggest gathering your plants in one place though, not spraying it throughout your home, because you don't really want to get this stuff on your walls and stuff either. So bringing them to a central place that has drainage and you don't mind getting a little bit sulfury is a good idea, because the walls of my shower got covered in sulfur, but because it's my shower, it's super duper easy to clean off, whereas the walls of your home, not going to be as easy to clean. So bringing your plants to a nice space that you can work in is really important, especially for me, especially if you're renting. You don't want to ruin the walls. Even if you own your home, you don't want to ruin the walls of your home. So bring them to a specific place. And then you get to mix up your sulfur treatment in your spray bottle. So I used this, and for this 1.5 liters of water, I used a tablespoon of the sulfur powder. This stuff, it is, I think, American, and so all of the instructions are in imperial gallons, which we don't use here in the UK, and so I did the math for you. For every 1.5 liters of water, you can use 1 tablespoon of this stuff. Also, the instructions don't have ratios for houseplants specifically, or flat mites even specifically. So I used the instructions for citrus because it talked about spider mites in it, and I figured if it can kill spider mites, it'll probably be able to kill the flat mites as well. So once you have added the sulfur to your water, give your bottle a good shake. You want to thoroughly mix the solution, and you'll be able to see that the solution becomes a sort of milky yellow color inside of the bottle. That is what you want. You will also have to regularly reshake up the solution while you're spraying because the sulfur does settle a little bit. So while you're spraying, just make sure you are giving it regular shakes to make sure that it is adequately mixed throughout the treatment process. And from there, you just get to spray all your plants. You want to spray the tops of the leaves, the bottoms of the leaves, the petioles, the stems, new growth. Spray everything. I'm pretty sure you probably don't need to spray the soil, but it'll probably just drip down into the soil anyway, and that is not a problem because sulfur actually is kind of a natural fertilizer, so it does boost the growth of your plants, which is quite nice. You don't need to worry about it getting into the soil and causing problems. So spray the entirety of the plant and really get in there until it is physically dripping off. And from there you have kind of two options. You can basically let that sit for a little while, let it dry off, and then rinse your plants off and bring them back out into your collection. But if you do that, you're going to need to be repeating this process weekly in order to get rid of all of flat mites, to kill them in their cycle, to stop the cycle over and over and over again as all of the eggs hatch. Because this doesn't kill the eggs, I think this just kills the larvae and the adults. It doesn't deal with the eggs, so you need to catch the eggs as they're hatching, and so you'll need to repeat this process weekly. That was not gonna be possible for me because I was treating my entire collection. I could not possibly bring my entire collection into my bathroom once a week to deal with this. I have far too many plants for that, and so I opted with the leave the sulfur on your plants solution instead, and I found that that worked pretty well because as the eggs hatch, the sulfur is still on the plants to deal with the flat mites as they're hatching, and it works better. I think you're supposed to repeat the process at about 6 weeks time in order to best deal with it. I personally left the sulfur on for months and then repeated the process once more, and that was enough for my plants in my collection. But ideally you are repeating the process after 6 weeks and then potentially for a third time after another 6 weeks. Like I said, I didn't do that, and I still found that my plants were fine with this, and I was able to get rid of a good chunk of the flat mice on a lot of my plants in my home. But that did mean that I had sulfur spots, or like water spot looking things, on my plants for approximately 6 months, maybe slightly less. It did take me a while to go through and clean them all off because, again, it was a process, but at this point the sulfur has been removed from all of the plants in my collection except for a select couple that I have noticed flat mites on since, but those are some young Hoyas that I have added to my collection slightly more recently, so I think they potentially could have come in to my collection with flat mites on them unknowingly because it is really easy to miss them. So I think those ones that I'm treating now are not ones that I was treating back in November time last year when I did sort of my big initial treatment. I also do recommend when you are doing your treatment to go through and wash any decorative pots you have your plants in that area. You don't need to put sulfur on the pots, but go through and wash the pots. Take this time to kind of spring clean your plants. I mean, for me this was like autumn winter cleaning them, but it was good to go through and clean all of the pots I had. And I also thoroughly cleaned the cabinet that I was working on, any shelves that the plants were on. I would go through and even wipe some of the walls behind them just to make sure that things were as clean as possible for the plants to go back. And if there were any flat mites that might have fallen off the plants or gone to like climb on a wall to go to the next one, they were absolutely eliminated. So take the time to thoroughly clean, and that will help. I know it's not fun. This was really, really hard work for me to go through and do all of this, but I found it worth it because I no longer have flat mites in the majority of my collection. And actually pretty soon after the first treatment, I noticed that a lot of my Hoyas started to grow again. There was a big boost in growth after that, like I said, because the sulfur is slightly like fertilizing the plant, and also the plants that have been suffering with flat mites this whole time are finally able to grow again because all of their new growth isn't just getting immediately eaten by the flat mites. And so I did notice quite a boom of growth after my initial treatment. So by now, like many months later, I think probably 8-ish months, if I started in November last year, 8-9 months ago, I feel like my collection is definitely clean. I was so glad that I was finally able to clear the sulfur spots off my plants. I didn't like the way they looked, but it's just something that I needed to do in order to feel confident in my collection. And I still have more sulfur, even though this bottle typically comes about half full. I don't know why they make such a big bottle if they're only going to fill it halfway, but it came about that full. I still have about that much left in the bottom, which is plenty. If I do notice flat mites coming back or any flat mites coming into my home, I can go through and treat them like I did with those Hoyas that I'm currently treating. So I do feel good about still having this on hand. I also found, because it does work against spider mites and thrips, that I had a pretty pest-free winter, which was really nice to not be having to deal with that throughout most of the winter, and kind of great to reset my whole collection. But if you are using sulfur treatment for pests other than flat mites like spider mites and thrips, you'll need to repeat the process much more often because the life cycle of them is shorter than that of flat mites. So I wouldn't really recommend this as a treatment for those, but it was kind of like an added bonus to the treatment, was that I just basically had a pretty pest-free winter. So that was pretty awesome, and really glad that that worked for them. But I can happily say that my plants are growing again, and especially things like my Hoya polyneura that was riddled with the flat mites is now producing so much more new growth, and it's actually starting to do the things again that I want my plants to do. So I'm very pleased that I was able to get rid of my flat mites, and I feel confident that I can identify them now, that I can treat them now, and that I won't let them affect my plants too negatively at this point, because I know how to deal with them. So feeling so much better about them now, and I hope after watching this video that you feel much more like informed and able to treat them if they come up for you in your collection. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up down below and leave a comment on other houseplanty things you'd like me to talk about in the future. If you have any other tips or tricks to deal with flat mites or false mites, put them down below in the comments, and subscribe for more. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and don't forget to keep growing. See you in the next one. Bye!